Hi, folks. I want to share with you a short video that hopefully will clarify some of the questions I've received about the uh, pursuit of equality and equal protection writing prompt. There are three questions, and I'm going to go through those three questions with you and then isolate the resources you can use to answer those questions. All the answers, all the information you need is contained in resources I provided to you, and I'm going to point you in the exact direction in which to fully answer the prompts for you. So the first thing I want to take a look at is the prompts themselves. Prompt one, in the context of our discussion of the historical events which led up to the Black Lives Matter movement, which led up to 2020, analyze the following quotes and interpret them. Tell me what they mean to you. An invented past can never be used. That is a past that's created on falsehoods, that doesn't really reflect the reality of the past, can never be used. We must excavate the true history of this country. We must explore and investigate and must take a look at the true history of this country, even if it might be painful at first. Now, the second part of that quote is, did America have the moral stamina? Do we have the energy to do the work required to surrender the comfort of its lies? So looking back at the history, we must determine what is supported by historical evidence and what is created to support a good feeling about our country. And in the process, can we have a more truthful, more accurate view of how this country came to 2020, and then work on it and make this country even greater than it is for all the people in our country. So take a look at those two quotes. Okay, that's the first prompt. And I'm going to go over some of the material that I've provided to you that will help you guide you through that first prompt. The second prompt, in 2020, a major national issue that is happening during our lifetime, during your lifetime, reflects two movements: the Black Lives Matter movement and the white supremacy movement. These movements have developed over the entire history of our nation. It just simply didn't happen over the last few months. They've been brewing and percolating now over the last 200 or so years, maybe even beyond that. So using the historical evidence you've been provided through the class presentation, class discussion, trace the events through American history which have brought about the current national issue. Now remember to weave the short historical stories provided to you. Remember, history is basically short stories woven together to give somebody insight. And take those short stories that I've provided to you to create an informative narrative that will give the reader, which is me or anyone else that might be reading your answer, insight, not into what is happening right now, but how we got to this point of things happening now. How did we get there? Again, it just didn't happen overnight. Okay? And prompt three, use the information that I provided to you in the Washington Post series, George Floyd's America. Discuss the pursuit of equal rights and equality in the United States. Discuss the challenges and opportunities we face. Okay? Use this article, the George Floyd's America, not to simply discuss George Floyd, but the country as seen through somebody that has experienced the things that George Floyd has experienced. Somebody who has seen and been either have opportunities or challenges, lack of access to education, great poverty. Try to put yourself into a situation that he and others in our country have experienced, and then write about those experiences. Not simply about George Floyd, but about those who have lived his type of life. Okay. Now, the resources that support this, I want to go over carefully with you, and that is I've given you a timeline. Now, you may think that we have not concentrated on any one or two particular events or issues, but we have mentioned all of the events that are in this timeline. We've covered a lot in the last 2 to 3 weeks. Starting back in 1691, you can see with, I'll blow this up a little bit, with the slaves from Africa being introduced to North America, our independence. Then we have in 1857, just before the Civil War, the Dred Scott decision. The Supreme Court said that slaves, whether enslaved or free, Africans, whether enslaved or free people, have no legal rights in this country. We had the start of the Civil War in 61, 63, the Emancipation Proclamation, and in 1865, the end of the Civil War. So this is where this all starts. And then we, if I can go over here a bit, we had Plessy v. Ferguson in 1898, just before the 20th century. And they ruled that African Americans, while they have got rights, they can be kept separate. And that led to, in 1898 and in the 1920s, remember the Wilmington, North Carolina, the White Declaration of Independence that wiped out whole communities of successful African Americans, the Jim Crow laws, the Black Codes, the rise of the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan, in order to enforce and to criminalize the activities of African Americans seeking to exert their voting rights or where they live. An example of this was in 1921, the Tulsa, Oklahoma, the Black Wall Street. And then in 1954, we had another Supreme Court decision, Brown versus Board of Education, that required that all of our culture be integrated, that there is no white or black separate, but everybody has to be treated equally and integrated together. We then got into as a result of that, we got into the modern civil rights movement with Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, the Civil Rights Act, and the Voting Rights Act. We had some assassinations of some leaders, Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. And then the 2000s, you were born. President Obama became our first African American elected president. President Trump in 2016 was elected. And we had a combination of the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement and the white supremacy movement between 2015 and 2020. We've covered all this in the last couple of weeks. Now, all of this is spelled out more carefully in the slideshow. So go through the slideshow. I've got the timeline in there. I've got the quotes that we discussed. We talked about we the people, who determines who this applies to. You would think it applies to everybody, but we've learned through history that we the people doesn't really mean all the people. We have the Dred Scott case that I've talked about. We've talked about the meaning of equal justice under law. We had a video on how we got from 2008, the election of our first African American president, Barack Obama. Take a look at the video. How did we get to Black Lives Matter, the history? We stopped in 1963 for the Martin Luther King I Have a Dream speech. 100 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, he still talks about the chains of segregation and the manacles of oppression. There's a little part of the speech. Here is the Wilmington, North Carolina video that describes how successful African Americans were then run out of town and violently overthrown in Wilmington, North Carolina by white supremacists. You had the same situation in Tulsa, Oklahoma, that's been in the news recently. And then I bring you up to date with the hate rising, the white supremacy in America. Go to the 13th Amendment, how that banned slavery, but left a sort of a loophole that you could be imprisoned if you violated laws. Well, if the laws are being made by those who want to keep control of the country, and they decide what laws are and the punishment. You get into, the basis of the Jim Crow laws and the 13th Amendment clip, and then you get into the background of the original policing, not so much in the 21st century, although there are police departments around the country that may, in regions of the country that may be tied to this, but back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, oftentimes people were hired as police departments, police officers to enforce the laws of the ruling group of people. You can see how that can develop and why there's some, in some regions of the country, some concern about police powers. We got into regional beliefs through these maps. The Confederacy, where segregated education was mandated. Electoral maps also show where some of these values and belief systems are still being held strong in our country. And then we get into some modern technology for civil rights, get into the meaning of statutes, and then the Air Force Academy speech. And then I get into this very dramatic George Floyd's America, and there's a link for you. In order to guide you through that, the George Floyd's America, I give you, where do I give it? Here it is, right here. I really break it down for you with links. I give you key articles within that very expansive article. I give you the links where to find this. Born with two strikes, segregated from opportunity, resources to understand America's long history. Really encourage you to take a look at this last one. And again, here are the links. So if you click on the links, you'll get right to these areas, okay? And there's some voices to be heard from the past. Also, you had these classroom organizers that gave you the focusing questions and gave you two. They were broken into two different organizers. The first one started at the beginning, of course, with focusing questions, and the second one started with the 13th Amendment. So this is a fairly complicated project. It looks like it's only like 3 questions, but it supports a great deal of information. You have a variety of various resources, whether it be videos or newspaper articles or pictures or quotes. It's all that historical evidence that we've talked about. It really is the culmination of the work we've done, not only in terms of the pursuit of equal protection, but also the skill set to look at historical evidence in many forms from a variety of different sources. Identify what will help answer your questions. That's problem solving, complex thinking. Apply it to these prompts, and then articulate, communicate your answers. Okay? So you've got 2 sort of big goals, objectives here. One is to demonstrate you understand the content of our first thread of American history. This is our first completed thread, pursuit of equal protection. It spans 200 plus years. You've got a variety of resources. It should take you some time to go through this all, identify what will help you create a well thought out, complete answer. There's no right or wrong answer. It's the process of coming to a result that I'm really looking at, okay? You should not be able to do this in simply a few hours. Do not sit down and just start typing out your answers. Organize it, read different parts of this, look at different videos, include things that are helpful, exclude things that won't add to your answer. This should take some time. This is a fairly complicated assignment for you. Okay, so I'm available for any other questions. I'm available to help if you need any help, and let me know.